Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Tyler Waldrop here with Tony Sukalis. We're here talking about the 8A game that would have been. As y'all might know, the 8A game would have been played today, but with everything going on, it's kind of been scrapped. So we're just here sort of giving our picks for who we think might have been the MVP if the game went down today and kind of talking about, what we miss about not covering it. Tony, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty well. It's crazy to think that the 8A game would have been today. In some ways, this quarantine period has gone by so slow, and on the other hand, it's crazy to think that spring football would have been over right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know. I'm just doing my best to live with it.
This should have been like a kind of a party, a celebration for us almost. We grinded it out, we covered spring football, and then we can kind of relax. And now we've really just done the relaxing.
Yeah, really. Yeah, there's no celebration of any kind of sports lately. I think today, there was a lot of excitement. It would have been our first real chance to see, Bryce Young in action. It would have been our first chance to see Trey Sanders in action. There's a whole bunch of freshmen, Will Anderson. Um, the list goes on and on. Drew Sanders. All these guys, I'd love to see them. I'd love to see what the offensive line would have looked like.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we would have had a better sense of how that was working. Maybe there'd be some surprises too,
Mm-hmm.
like maybe it'd be Dalcourt at center and Lennon Dickerson at left guard. There's so many things it could have been, and the spring's a time where you can kind of explore all these things, and we really missed out on that.
Well, it's safe to say that Tony's definitely going stir crazy if he's dreaming about who might have played center for Alabama's offensive line in the
I
spring
think a
game.
lot of people, though, a lot of people are interested in that.
So I mean, you talked about surprises that we could have seen it in the 8A game if it had happened. I think a big surprise was John Mechie being the MVP last year. Uh, you know, who do you think would have been that John Mechie for this year? Who would have been the MVP if the spring game had happened today?
Yeah, so that's the question for today is, who would have won the MVP? That's our part of our 20 for 20 series. I think, look, I'm going to go with what I think is probably the obvious choice. That I'm going to go with Bryce Young. I'm doing so because not only is he playing a quarterback position, he's playing most likely on the second string offense, playing against the second string defense. So he would be throwing against the second team secondary, which if you look at Alabama's first team secondary, it's not really even figured out yet. So its second team secondary is even less experienced. I think this is a time where maybe the second team offense, especially if you have a talented player like Bryce Young, might be able to take advantage of the second team defense. So from a pure, hypothetical statistical look at things, I think I'd pick Bryce Young. I mean, look at what John Mechie did last year. He was on the second team offense. So I really, I think it would have been a time when we would have been really excited about Bryce Young and maybe kind of stirred up that quarterback competition.
Well, I don't know if the quarterback competition needs any more drama or needs to be stirred up, but you talked about him going against the second team defense. Mac Jones won this award 2 years ago because he was going against the second team defense, right?
Yeah, that's true. Didn't he share it with Joseph Bulovas, I believe?
Yes, yeah. The kicker and the backup quarterback won that year, so that was an interesting 8A game for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and hey, Will Reichert could have won it. That's another guy we would have
Mm.
gotten to see this spring, and you kind of see how he rebounded from his hip flexor injury. So, depending on if Alabama could push the ball in the end zone or not, we might have seen a lot of field goals, and that might have been encouraging as well.
Yeah, so my pick, I considered Bryce Young. Ultimately, he's probably the second guy I would have gone with, but just looking back at the list, Mechie won it last year. Mac Jones split it with Bulovas the year before, and in 2017, Jerry Jeudy won it. But that was before we knew what Alabama had in Jerry Jeudy. That was before his freshman season. So I decided to kind of stick with the recent trend that's developed of sort of backup, unheralded receivers having success. I went with 6'6", 205-pound Tyrell Shavers. I expected him to be on the second string offense, so he's going against the backup defense. And, I figured that he kind of has the size and potentially the talent to kind of take advantage of that matchup.
I like that pick. I think a lot of Alabama fans would like that pick, and I think that talk about a guy that would bring a lot of excitement if he was to do well in the 8A game.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people want to see Tyrell Shavers live into his potential, especially at that 6'6" frame. He'd give Alabama a different kind of option on this offense. So, that would have stirred up some excitement among Alabama fans. I think another person maybe you look at from that receiver, if you're looking at that role, depending on where you want to play, like a Slade Bolden, I think he would have been an exciting player. Maybe, Alabama's had some pretty exciting looks out of the Wildcat with him. Maybe they would – I don't know how much you preview of that during a spring game, but, that could cause some excitement too. Maybe he gets involved in a big play. Younger receivers like for example, maybe Trayshawn Holden, a guy that's, rooming with Bryce Young, a guy that was California guy with Bryce Young. Maybe they would have a connection. Maybe he could kind of use this as an opportunity to kind of get his name out there and start some momentum behind his name. A lot of people. We haven't even mentioned anybody really on defense at all either. But, maybe a linebacker would pop out, out of nowhere. Maybe, it's a chance for a guy like Ali Cajo, to kind of put his name back in there. So I think last year we saw Shane Lee make an interception and return it. If I believe right, I think that happened last year too. So, there's a lot of ways you can choose in terms of guys that really can make that could have made an impact in this game.
I think if I'm a fan, or if I'm just me from maybe 12 hours ago before I'm breaking down the list of who's won it over the last couple of years, like I'm thinking, okay, well, why didn't they say Waddle or Devontae Smith or Najee Harris? And, Tony, you can sort of elaborate, but just looking back at the list, really, I think Yeldon in 2014 might have been the last time an established, starter won this award. And you just look, and the guys that, sort of already have defined roles either don't get the workload or they're just going against the top defense and they don't have the sort of success in the 8A game.
It's more, I think, about them just going against the top defense. But actually, if you look at it this year, it might actually have been the counterpoint of everything we just said. It might have been a year where a first-team player won it. You look, Alabama's replacing 4 out of its 5 nickel defensive backs, starting nickel defensive backs. So that first-team secondary wasn't going to be all that established anyways. If you get a guy like Mac Jones throwing to a guy like Devontae Smith or Jalen Waddle, they're comfortable. They're kind of already established veterans. I could see an argument where maybe one of them gets it, or perhaps a Najee Harris or a Trey Sanders. But I think Trey Sanders probably would have been on the second team offense most likely. So yeah, it could have very well been a first team offensive player. Usually this award goes to an offensive player. I don't remember the last time it went to a defensive player. So that's the reason why we're only really mentioning offensive players. Obviously, this is a game where people would have loved to see possibly like Dylan Moses, at least make an appearance or play. So yeah, there's a lot of defensive guys we would have liked to see in this game as well. But I think when you're talking offensive players, that's the real MVP candidates.
Yeah, and I think that makes a good deal of sense. By the way, off the top of my head, I think it was 1992, the last time a defensive player won this award. So it's definitely been a while. I considered Moses before I broke down the list, but offensive players just don't tend to win. And that kind of makes sense considering, this isn't a time when you want to see guys making big hits against their teammates,
right?
And against quarterbacks, you're just gonna get, a two-hand touch on those guys. So it's hard to impress when you're so limited with what you can do defensively.
Right. And then, I kind of think we probably would have seen a limited version of Dylan Moses anyways this spring. Alabama kind of would probably take things slow with him, even if he is able to participate in things. They did the same thing with Terrell Lewis last year. So I don't really see a guy like that probably like showing out in a game where Alabama's just trying to get him through it without, without him getting injured or, without further complicating things like that. Maybe a Patrick Surtain, maybe he could get an interception, return for a touchdown, something like that. Maybe it'd have to be like a defensive score.
Yeah.
These games, I would say that they lean high scoring games, but sometimes they're not. So
Yeah.
maybe, yeah. So maybe it could be, maybe it's like I'm just trying to throw out even more names. Maybe it's like a Brian Robinson. You just don't know. Yeah.
And I think one name that you mentioned that I did think is interesting is Trey Sanders. Obviously, I think he's probably the one player we both would have been, other than maybe Bryce Young, most excited to see in action is, what can Trey Sanders do against, whether he's against the first team defense or the second team? What's he look like? He stands out as a name that, I haven't even seen him in practice yet. I know that you saw him last year, so I just want to see the guy do anything.
Yeah, see, and he came in the fall last year, and I think he only practiced, if I remember right, about a week before, sustaining that injury that kept him out for the whole season. So, I think Saban was asked a question about him last fall and said that he was a guy that, could be able to contribute and that could do a lot for the offense, but it was early on, so it's not even like Saban could have really given a full report of how he was doing. So really this spring was going to be our first true look at Trey Sanders. I know we got to see him a little bit during drills, but there's only so much you can see off of that. So he'd probably be the number one guy I'd be in. Well, him and Bryce Young, but I think in terms of like who's going to make a bigger impact this year, I think it'd be Trey Sanders just because of the position he plays. And, I kind of think Mac Jones is going to be that guy. So you can only be one quarterback, but you can rotate those running backs.
Yeah, and I didn't really seriously consider Sanders for the MVP for the 8A game, just because I assumed, with an ongoing quarterback competition, there's going to be some emphasis on throwing the ball so the coaches get some good tape of those guys. Did that factor into your decision at all?
Yeah, I mean, he would also probably be on the second team, so he's going against second team, linebackers. I think there's a lot of depth at that linebacker position. So like is Shane Lee now a second team linebacker? And I think maybe you have a little bit more depth at that than you do in the secondary on the second team. So that could influence it. I think he'd be in that conversation though. I wouldn't be shocked if he was, come in and have a big spring. So
yeah, it's just honestly, it's just crazy that we're doing this. We're having a video talking about what could have been the 8A we lost, and but I guess good for John Mechie. He gets to be the reigning 8A MVP for one more year.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe it's John Mechie. Maybe John Mechie repeats. I think T.J. Yeldon. What did he win 3 years in a row?
Yeah.
So maybe this is John Mechie's. It would have been his year all over again.
So, I think, Tony and I, we kind of gave y'all several names to consider. We'd love to know who y'all think could have been the MVP of the 8A game if it happened. Who were y'all most excited to see back, even if they wouldn't win the MVP? Was it a guy like Dylan Moses? Was it Reichert? Just please like and comment. Let us know what you think. Do you agree with Tony? Do you think that it was, could have been Bryce Young? Do you think I was onto something with Tyrell Shavers, or were we both off? Do you think it was going to be a guy like Najee, a first teamer, or a Waddle, or even a Devontae Smith? But anyway, just comment. Let us know what y'all think, and come back tomorrow and check us out, and we'll continue our 20 for 20 series.
Yeah, and make sure to like and subscribe, and turn on your notifications too, because we're having a lot of these videos, and we'll be here almost every day with a new video. So definitely make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications.
Yeah, we got nowhere else to be for the foreseeable future. That's for sure. Okay, everybody be safe and join us back tomorrow.